The story begins August 1710 when Robert Harley was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the equivalent of Secretary of Treasury in the US. He's got a pretty big problem to solve as Great Britain is in around £9 million of debt. Enter John Blunt, the owner of the Hollowed Sword Company, an economically inclined individual who devised a scheme. First, he would acquire a large amount of army dentures or military IOUs. Then, he would offer to trade the army dentures for stock in the Hollowed Sword Company, increasing the value of the army dentures, which he then used to buy land from the government at an inflated price. This was less than legal, but he got away with it because he was lending money to the government at this point. Harley still needing more money and Blunt still wanting to make more money, they devised a beautiful scheme. It went something like this. Blunt would be responsible for the lottery, and Harley would make sure that happened. So Blunt got to work and he sold all of his lottery tickets on the first day. But because he wanted to keep those sales going, he did something quite clever. He made it so that way every single person who bought into the lottery had a 100% chance to win, with a minimum payout of 10%. To make this work, however, he had to make sure that the government would not have to pay that debt immediately, or they would just be taking on debt that they could not pay. So the winnings were given out over 10 years, making it so that way Harley could have the money he needed now to keep the government running. However, this was never going to be enough, so they devised another scheme. Enter the South Sea Trading Company. This was created exclusively because the Bank of England was controlled by the opposite political party of Harley, and that made it so he had nowhere to consolidate the national debt. The goal of the company was to acquire all of the government's debt. The way this was planned to be achieved was by allowing the trade of debt for shares in the company. Then, the government would pay 6% interest on that debt, which was far less than private parties were being paid. The debt paid to the South Sea Trading Company would then be used to pay the investors. But this was not enough alone to get all of those who had national debt to just give it up. There had to be one little bit of zest on there. So they were granted a monopoly on South Sea trade. There's only one problem. Spain owned all the ports in the South Sea. So they were at war with Spain. So they did what any, good quality citizen would do. And they had a campaign to end that war. And once they did, they got exactly what they wanted: trade in the South Sea. But there's a catch. Spain limited them to one boat per port annually, and they only could trade slaves, which was not even close to enough to cover the cost of running this business. In other words, they were never going to make money. They were here exclusively to consolidate debt, and everyone near this company knew that. But that's not what the public knew. Robert Harvey will be leaving this story as 1714 has arrived and Queen Anne has died, without an heir to the throne. King George, however, will be taking in command, and he has good plans. His great plan to appoint his son, George II, as governor of the South Sea Trading Company could not possibly go wrong. Not only did it increase trust in the company, then Blunt, being absolutely ecstatic with this, convinced the king himself to invest in the company, meanwhile forgiving 2 years of government debt to soothe over the transition to a new government. This allowed the government, being very favorable towards this, to allow him to appoint £10,000 worth of stocks in the South Sea Trading Company, which allowed the value of this company to reach heights so damn high that they were worth half of every company in England alone. After achieving this insane amount of worth, it's probably best to mention they had not made any money from trading, even though they were named the South Sea Trading Company. Then the 1710 lottery, which was created by Blunt himself, was then given to the South Sea Trading Company along with more national debt in exchange for more stocks being issued. And remember earlier how King George appointed his son? Well, his son argued with him. So now the governor of the South Sea Trading Company was King George himself. And that's all fine and dandy, but because of some clever manipulation of outside events by Blunt, this allowed the South Sea Trading Company's stock price to go from £100 to £114 per share, which is not that significant until you consider that the exchange rate was set for $100 stocks, which meant that now Blunt could sell off the excess stocks that he no longer needed to still cover that national debt, which is absolutely absurd. This gave Blunt some crazy ideas, who then proceeded to start bribing members of parliament and getting others to buy into the South Sea Trading Company, as he knew if he could assume 100% of the government's debt, he could drive stock prices much higher, and he could get quite a lot of profit out of this. Blunt successfully convinced Parliament to allow all of the national debt to go to the South Sea Trading Company at £100 per share. But unfortunately for them, the stock price of the South Sea Trading Company had gone up much further than that, to $310 per share. But it wasn't done here. Blunt had another idea. He would allow those who wanted to invest but could not afford to do a 20% down payment on these investments, and this would allow them to pay it off per month, which allowed even the poorest to invest. But this wasn't all he did. He also started giving out loans to allow people to invest, to keep the stock price as high as possible, as long as possible. And then, before you know it, 1720 came around, and the stock price reached £1,000 per share and immediately dropped, leaving everyone who was invested in this company completely ruined. Many people went bankrupt, ruined lives, suicide rates skyrocketed. Britain was pretty screwed right now. Overall, what we can take away from this is financial bubbles still happen and exist today. Not to the severity of this one, but you should definitely be aware if a company you're investing in is making a profit or not. It's very important to actually have someone look at that. And as far as the aftermath of this, I'm not going to get to it in this video, but I may get to it if you ever request it. If you have any ideas for future videos, let me know. That's all for today, folks.